The ledger that broke on the 12th line. Wittgenstein's rule following paradox and Kripke's plus Q's problem. There is an orchard high in the folds of a mountain where the frost comes early and the soil forgives nothing. For 6 generations, it has been kept by a single family, and the keeping is not gardening, it is arithmetic. Each spring, the keeper opens the ledger and finds the last number written there. That number tells her which row to graft. The rule is simple, and it has never once been explained, only demonstrated. Take the last number, add 3, 4, then 7, then 10, 13, 16, 19, 22, 25, 28, 31, 34, 11 harvests, 11 entries, each one obedient to the same quiet law. The old keeper, whose hands had gone the color of bark, was training her successor, a sharp, patient woman named Irina, for what both of them understood to be the last season. Show me you have it, the old woman said one evening, tapping the ledger. Irina took the pen. 34, add 3, 37. She wrote it without hesitation, the way you'd say your own name. And after that, 40, then 43. I could carry it to the end of the book if you asked me to. The old keeper smiled in a way Irina didn't understand yet, and said only, "Good," and did not correct her, because there was nothing yet to correct. She died before the next thought. Irina kept the orchard alone for 3 seasons, entering 37, 40, 43, each one landing exactly where she expected, each one a small, satisfying confirmation that she had inherited the rule cleanly, that the numbers in her head and the numbers in the ledger were and had always been the same thing. Then came a season nobody had planned for. A cousin from the valley, Dobrin, arrived with a claim. He too had been taught the ledger years earlier by the same old woman, before Irina's apprenticeship had even begun. He had his own memory of the rule, and he opened the book to the same next line and wrote, instead of 46, 45. She told me, Dobrin said, that after 40, the row narrows and the count must slow. Add 3 until the sun passes 40, and add 2 after. It's in the shape of the land. You'd know it if you walked the upper terrace. You don't walk the upper terrace. It did narrow. It had always narrowed, for 11 harvests, but the ledger had never once climbed past 40 before now. So the narrowing had never mattered, and no one had ever had to decide whether it was part of the rule or merely a fact sitting beside it, unconsulted. Every number either of them could point to in that book, all 11 of them, fit both stories perfectly. Add 3 forever, or add 3 until 40, then add 2. The two rules were indistinguishable for the entire recorded history of the orchard, and only now, on the 12th entry, on the row that had never existed before, did they pull apart. They searched everything, the old woman's letters, the marginalia and the ledger's binding, a cracked recording of her voice kept by a neighbor saying numbers into a wax cylinder decades ago. Nothing settled it. Every fragment of evidence was and could only ever be a finite fragment, and the finite fragment is compatible with more than one rule stretching to infinity. You cannot show your work far enough to prove which of two roads you were always walking, when the roads have been the same road until this exact step. Irina sat with the ledger the night before the graft was due and thought. She understood at last what the old woman's smile had meant years before when she'd said good without saying correct. She hadn't been withholding a fact. There may not have been one to withhold. The old keeper's own mind, if you could have opened it at any of those 11 harvests, might not have contained an answer either, only a habit that had never yet been asked to reveal its edges. What Irina ran into that night is not really a story about orchards. It's a thought experiment that sits near the center of 20th century philosophy of language and mind, and most closely associated with Ludwig Wittgenstein's later work on rule following, sharpened into its most famous modern form by Saul Kripke in his 1982 book on Wittgenstein, the argument often nicknamed Kripkenstein. Kripke's version uses arithmetic rather than orchards. Suppose you've only ever added numbers smaller than 57. You believe you've been following the rule plus, ordinary addition. But define a different function, q's. It behaves exactly like plus for any pair of numbers under 57, and then outputs 5 for everything else. Every calculation you have ever actually performed is equally consistent with plus and with q's. So, what fact about you, your past behavior, your mental images, even the neural states in your brain determines that you meant plus and not q's? Kripke's unsettling answer: nothing does. No finite history of use can fix an infinite rule. This is the rule following paradox, and it applies not just to arithmetic, but to any word or concept you've ever used a finite number of times, which is to say, every word and concept you have. This isn't ordinary skepticism about the future, like not knowing if the sun will rise tomorrow. It's a skepticism about meaning itself, a claim that there may be no fact, even in principle, about which rule you have been meaning all along. Because meaning something by a symbol seems to require reaching infinitely into cases you've never encountered, and nothing in a finite mind or a finite history can reach that far. Wittgenstein's own diagnosis in the philosophical investigations is that we go wrong by looking for a fact to settle the question, some inner mechanism, some rail laid out in advance that determines correct continuation the way tracks determine where a train goes. He argues no such rail exists, inside us or outside us. What Kripke calls the skeptical solution doesn't refute the paradox, it changes what meaning consists of. Instead of asking, what facts makes it true that I mean plus, we ask, what entitles me to assert that I mean plus? And the answer is social. I'm entitled because my answers agree with the community I was trained in, and being wrong just is diverging from that shared practice. Meaning, on this view, isn't a private possession verified against some inner blueprint. It's a form of life, checked communally, all the way down. The paradox echoes elsewhere. You might recognize it in, in Quine's indeterminacy of translation, where no amount of behavioral evidence can pin down a unique meaning for a foreign speaker's word. In debates over machine learning generalizations, where a model trained on finite data is, in the same structural sense, always compatible with infinitely many rules beyond its training set, and in law, where a finite set of past rulings never uniquely determines how a principle must apply to an unprecedented case. Irina never found out which rule the old woman meant. She wrote 46, not because she proved it was right, but because it was the road she had always answered with. And she decided, finally, that the deciding was hers to do. Thank you for tuning in to the Myth of Logos. See you on the next episode.